The year is 1998. Titanic and Saving Private Ryan are dominating the box office. Lauryn Hill has dropped one of the most influential hip hop albums ever with The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls have just completed their second three-peat. It's also the year that I was born, and what a handsome little fella, if I do say so myself. But while all of this was happening, Konami and Hideo Kojima were releasing a game that would go on to become one of the most influential franchises in gaming history. For years, I've heard people call Metal Gear Solid one of the greatest games ever made, and I always assumed it was nostalgia. I mean, it's an original PlayStation game from the 90s. It couldn't possibly hold up in 2026, right? Well, after finally sitting down and playing it for myself for the very first time, I realized this game isn't just about sneaking around in cardboard boxes. It's about nuclear deterrence, government secrecy, soldiers being treated as disposable assets, and the dangers of technological advancement. And somehow, those ideas feel more relevant today than ever. What's going on with all you beautiful people, extraterrestrials, or whatever you want to identify yourself as? It's your boy Rob. Yes, just Rob. And today we're talking about some Metal Gear. I recently put up a TikTok asking whether I should replay the Batman Arkham Collection or finally play Metal Gear for the first time, and an overwhelming number of you all picked me to play Metal Gear. So I just want to publicly say thank you all, because this game has been an absolute blast. Between its gripping story, incredible atmosphere, and stealth gameplay that constantly keeps me on the edge, I've genuinely enjoyed every hour I've spent with it so far. If you're new around here, I make videos reviewing games and talking about interesting topics in gaming culture, so if that's something that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing and ringing the bell so that you don't miss any future updates from yours truly. I also want to preface that most of the clips in this video is going to be from a stream. I stream most of my Metal Gear playthrough, and I'm also going to be streaming Metal Gear 2 as well as the rest of the series as well. So if you want to catch some of my live reactions, I would definitely recommend, hopping on the YouTube live with me sometime, and also join the Discord so you can also get updates for that as well. And I'll have the link to the Discord down in the comments below. Now that we got everything out of the way, everybody strap yourselves in, hands and feet inside the ride at all times, and somebody cue my intro. Now, coming into Metal Gear, I expected a game that felt a bit dated, and while part of that is true, that wasn't entirely my experience. What surprised me was how intentional everything feels in a game of this age. This isn't the kind of stuff where you're just crouching in the shadows, hoping enemies don't see you. The game constantly makes you think ahead, and you're not reacting, you're planning. The game gives me many tools besides just weapons. You have stun grenades, frag grenades, chafe grenades, which disables electronics so you can't be spotted by cameras, mine detectors, and trust me, I've used all of these gadgets in my playthrough. There's also a ton of player agency in this game, like you won't have the same experience in each mission in the game. As a matter of fact, in the Sniper Wolf boss fight, which I'm not a fan of by the way, but more on her later, someone on my stream told me that they didn't even beat her using a sniper, but they instead used the missile launchers, which made the fight way easier. There's just so many different ways to tackle an obstacle in this game, and it showed how ahead of its time this game was. The AI is also superb as well, and when you're trying to sneak around, this isn't just the kind of stealth where you're just crouching in the shadows hoping enemies don't see you. The game constantly makes you think ahead, and if you make too much noise, you're gonna get spotted, and when you do, everybody is on your ass. The AI didn't feel like they had super hearing or just superb instincts. When I messed up, it didn't feel random. It felt like I truly made a mistake. You can't simply just rush into a room and try to clear out the enemies, especially how quickly you can run out of ammo. And I think that's what makes stealth work so well. It's not just hiding, it's controlling all. Or more accurately, the lack of control. Because a lot of the time, you're not really in control of the situation, you're trying to regain it. Boss fights also caught me off guard, and I expected them to just be your run-of-the-mill, straightforward action encounters, but instead they feel almost like puzzles. You're encouraged to observe patterns and learn behaviors of the bosses, almost like you're playing a Souls game, and oftentimes I felt like dying wasn't a reset button for me, but instead an opportunity to try and approach that fight in a different way. You have some of your more simple boss fights like Ocelot, where you're fighting this tight room where he has President Baker tied up with these C4s. And if you step over these trip wires or shooting the wires, it causes him to blow up and, of course, game over. Then you have your more unique boss fights like Psycho Mantis, where I literally had to create a second controller port on my emulator for him to stop dodging all of my attacks so I can actually do real damage to him. The boss fights didn't feel like I just had to simply shoot them in order to win, but I actually had to uniquely and honestly creatively think of different ways to beat those bosses. So that was honestly a big step up in this game for me as well, and I'm looking forward to that as I continue on my Metal Gear journey. Another thing that stood out is how much the codec adds to this whole super spy soldier experience. On paper, it's just communication with your team, but in practice, it constantly breaks up the gameplay in a way that makes completing the overall mission feel like it's always an active threat looming and adds as an impromptu cutscene in between combat. I never really felt alone, even when I was crawling through vents or sneaking through corridors. Someone is always talking to me and guiding me along this journey. When I first fought Psycho Mantis a couple of times, he was absolutely working me. There was nothing I could do to get any real damage off, and it wasn't until I dialed the kernel and realized that since Psycho Mantis is this mind-reading being, I needed to make a separate controller port on my emulator so that way he's not able to read my attacks. And man, that moment right there just blew my mind because what felt like just communication between Snake and his team added more surveillance and disguised as support. So yeah, gameplay wise, I went in expecting something I have to put up with to get to the story, but instead it's something that added to my engagement because even when nothing is happening on screen, the game is always making me think. If there's one thing that caught me completely off guard, it wasn't just the gameplay, it was the atmosphere. The fictional setting of Shadow Moses feels less like a video game level and more like a place that actually exists as it's based on Alaska after all. It's cold, isolated, and strangely empty, but that emptiness almost makes it feel more unsettling. The OST also helps feed into this unsettledness and hammers home the isolated feeling in this world. When the game begins, Shadow Moses seems relatively straightforward. You're a retired Special Forces operative sent into a remote nuclear disposal facility to stop Metal Gear, the heavily armored walking tank that's able to launch nuclear warheads from anywhere. Sounds simple enough, or at least that's what the games want you to believe. The deeper I got into this world, the more that simple mission started to unravel. Every new area felt like another layer of a mystery for me. You will have some areas that fill with gas and you throw in your gas mask so you don't lose oxygen, which will eventually eat at your health bar. And there's also sections where you have this room filled with infrared lasers and you have to light a cigarette in order to be able to see those lasers. The game was just truly ahead of its time and I can't undersell that enough. Every codec call where we would get a piece of info about what's going on seemed to answer questions about what was going on while also completely changing how I viewed the situation because, again, the game is always throwing something new at me. What also really impressed me was how everything just naturally unfolded. As I mentioned, most of the game's story is told through those codec calls, but it never really feels like it's info dumping you. Instead, it slowly feeds you detail through these conversations between these characters. It really felt like I was not necessarily just playing a game, but watching an old school spy movie. The voice acting is top notch, and although there's just still images of these characters' portraits, you can feel the characters' emotion through their voice lines. That's art. You're uncovering the truth in everything surrounding it alongside Snake, and that makes a huge difference. Shadow Moses itself plays a massive role in that feeling as well. The facility is cold, isolated, and hostile, and snow blankets everything. You have these metal corridors that stretch endlessly in every direction, and most of the people you encounter are either enemies or individuals with motives that aren't immediately clear. The entire setting creates this sense of paranoia, not the kind where you're afraid of what's around the next corner, but the kind where you're never completely sure of who you can trust. That feeling extends to almost every major character in the game. Throughout the story, everyone seems to know more than they're willing to share. Even when someone appears to be helping Snake, there's always this lingering feeling that you're only hearing part of the story. And then there's Foxhound. What I expected were traditional video game bosses, but what I got were some of the most memorable antagonists I've seen in a video game pretty much ever. Each member of Foxhound feels distinct. They aren't simply obstacles standing between Snake and the end credits. They each have their own personalities, beliefs, motivations, and histories that make them feel like actual characters rather than boss encounters. You have the psychological warfare from Psycho Mantis and the government experience that were done on him, then the emotional way that Sniper Wolf places on herself acting solely on vengeance, and even the larger role of Liquid Snake plays throughout the story. All of these members aren't just bosses that Snake have to get by, they're prisoners of war that's being manipulated by their own superiors. And because the game takes the time to develop these characters, defeating them often feels less like winning a battle and more like witnessing another piece of the larger tragedy unfolding around Shadow Moses. What really stood out to me though was how ambitious Metal Gear Solid felt. This wasn't a game that was content with being just a military action story. It wanted to talk about politics, nuclear weapons, government secrecy, genetics, identity, and the consequences of war. And somehow it manages to weave all of those ideas into the world without making them feel disconnected from the experience. While the world of Metal Gear is fascinating on its own, none of it will work without the man at the center of it all, Solid Snake. Before playing Metal Gear Solid, my initial introduction to Snake was in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I never played with him as a character, granted I was never any good at that game anyway, but I know how iconic his character is in the landscape of gaming. Donning his bandana, the cigarette, the gravelly voice that sounds like he's trying to let out a big cough. I didn't really have any high expectations for this character, but after finally experiencing Metal Gear Solid for myself, what surprised me about Snake was that beneath all of that legendary soldier status is a character who feels incredibly human. Snake starts off as this cold-blooded killer who only values the goal of completing his mission. He's quiet, stoic, a womanizer, and cool under pressure, and a hero for his country. While the government calls him out, when the government calls him back from retirement with the task of stopping Metal Gear, he spent most of the game being treated just as a weapon. Despite being the man everyone depends on, he's often the last person in the room to know what's actually going on as information is constantly being withheld from him. I think that's what makes him such an interesting character for me. For someone constantly referred to as a legend, Snake has surprisingly little control over his circumstances. He's a soldier carrying out orders while trying to figure out everything that's going on around him, and throughout the game, you can hear that frustration starting to build. He begins to question people and challenge authority, and after a while, he doesn't just blindly accept everything he's told. Unlike merely military protagonists, Snake isn't portrayed as someone who simply follows orders because they're orders. He wants answers, and honestly, as I was playing, so did I. The more I played, the more my brain began churning, and the more I realized Snake was asking many of the same questions I was. Who can we trust, and what's actually happening at Shadow Moses and everything surrounding this Metal Gear project? That connection between me as the player and Snake is what makes his character work so well, but what really elevated him for me were his relationships with the people around him. His interactions with people like Arkham reveal a more compassionate side behind the hardened soldier exterior, and his relationship with Meryl gives us glimpses of someone who wants to believe that there's more to life than combat. But this compassionate side doesn't just end for his allies, it's also extended towards his foes and the members of Foxhound. I think about fights like the Cyborg Ninja, who was later to be revealed as Frank Yeager, and Sniper Wolf, where Snake showed empathy towards these people who in any other game would simply just be a target. And it occurred to me that Snake is not fighting because he enjoys it, but it's the role he's been given and it's all that he's known. That makes one of the game's biggest questions hit even harder. If you spend your entire life being treated like a weapon, can you ever become anything else? And that's the exact internal question that Snake himself encounters as I'm on this journey with him. Because underneath the legend is a man struggling to find purpose in a world that constantly defines him by what he can do instead of who he is. And that struggle ends up tying directly into some of the biggest themes Metal Gear Solid explores. The further I got into Metal Gear Solid, the more it became clear that this isn't just a game about infiltrating a base and stopping a weapon. It's a game that constantly asking questions about the truth and what it actually means to be a soldier in a system that's always operating above your head. One of the strongest themes in the game is how little anyone actually knows, and I don't just mean Snake. Pretty much every major character is working with incomplete information. Orders come in, then they change, people give advice, but it's often vague or filtered. Even the people who are supposed to be guiding Snake doesn't seem to agree with what's really going on. At a certain point, I started realizing something kind of interesting as a player. Snake is confused, but so am I. And this is all by design. The game doesn't really give you a neutral narrator you can trust. Instead, you're constantly trying to figure out who's telling the truth based on small pieces of information. Is the Colonel acting on some secret plan? Is Meryl going to snake me out? No pun intended. Is Naomi a double agent? These were all the questions that were running through my mind every time I got a new piece of information. And this creates a feeling where even simple conversations feel suspicious. Like there's always something being left out, and by the end of the game, that pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Then there's Metal Gear itself. On the surface, it's just a giant walker nuclear weapon, but the more the game talks about it, the more it starts feeling like a sci-fi machine and starts feeling like a metaphor for real-world power. Because the idea behind it isn't just destruction, it's deterrence. It's the idea that peace is maintained not because war is impossible, but because the consequences are too extreme for anyone to risk it. And the game keeps coming back to that question in different ways. If a weapon can end everything, does it actually create peace, or does it just create a different kind of fear? What makes it more unsettling is that nobody in this world seems to finally trust that balance. Everyone is either trying to control the power or prevent someone else from controlling it, and Snake is caught right in the middle of it. Another thing that kept standing out to me is how Metal Gear Solid treats its soldiers. Remember, Snake isn't acting as a traditional legendary hero that he's introduced as in the beginning. He's not making decisions for himself, and he's just a soldier that's following orders to a degree, doesn't even realize he's being manipulated by the same government he swore to serve. And that idea extends beyond Snake too. A lot of the characters he encounters don't feel like they're acting out of pure ideology. They feel shaped by something else, whether it's war, experiments, manipulation, or circumstances that they didn't choose. Which starts to build this bigger idea that in this world, people aren't always the ones writing their own roles. Then there's something a little more subtle running underneath everything, which is identity. Because the game keeps circling around the idea of what someone is made for. Snake is treated like a legendary soldier and almost a tool that was designed for combat from the start, but the more you spend time with him, the more you start to wonder if that label actually fits him, or if something that was put onto him by other people. If someone is raised, trained, and shaped for a specific purpose, how much of who they are is actually their own choice? And can they ever really become something different from what they were built to be? Metal Gear doesn't really answer that cleanly, but it just keeps asking it in different ways, and what's crazy is how all of these themes overlap without ever feeling separate. And the more I played, the more I realized this game isn't just telling a story about stopping a nuclear weapon, it's telling a story about systems, whether that be systems of power, war, or information. And it also is about how individuals like Snake are often just pieces moving through them. By the time I reached the end, I wasn't just thinking about what happened in the story. I was thinking about how many things in that world were never fully explained in the first place. And that's what stuck with me the most. It's not just the plot, but it's the feeling that there was always something bigger happening just out of view. So after all these years, is Metal Gear Solid one of the greatest games ever made? Honestly, I don't know if there's a real answer to that question. There are too many incredible games across too many different generations to confidently crown a single game as the GOAT. However, what I can say is I fully understand why Metal Gear Solid is a part of that conversation. What impressed me the most wasn't just any one thing. It wasn't just the stealth gameplay, it wasn't just the boss fights, it wasn't even the story. It was how all these things work together. Everything feels connected, and even 30 years later, Metal Gear Solid still feels ambitious in a way that surprised me. It asked questions back then that most games today aren't willing to ask. Questions about power, identity, and war, and about who gets to control information and who pays the price for those decisions. What's funny is that I started this journey on a random whim on a social media post, and I was thinking about, I was just gonna play another old game that people remember through rose-colored glasses and nostalgia, but instead I found a game that challenged me and constantly made me think. Whether I was sneaking past guards, piecing together a conspiracy, or questioning the motivation of the people giving me orders, for the first time I understand why people speak about Metal Gear with the kind of reverence that they usually reserve for the greatest games ever made. So is Metal Gear Solid the greatest game ever made? Maybe, maybe not, but after finally experiencing it for myself for the first time, I can confidently say that it's one of the most impactful games I've ever played. Now, if you all excuse me, I gotta get started on Metal Gear 2. Thank you all for watching, and if you liked the video, then don't forget to like the video on your way out. And if you enjoy content like this, consider subbing to the channel and tapping the bell icon so you never miss a video from yours truly. Again, all of my clips are, all of my VODs are on my YouTube here. You just got to go to the live session, and we'll also be live streaming Metal Gear Solid 2, both on YouTube and on TikTok. Well, depends if TikTok doesn't want to use up all my damn bandwidth. There's also going to be other games in the future I want to try out for the first time. Like there's a couple of game franchises I've never touched, but when that time comes, I'll make a poll for you all and we'll decide there. But again, thank you all for watching the video. I hope you all stay safe and stay dangerous. It's been your boy Rob. Yes, just Rob, and I'm out. Peace.